All right, we're sending data, and now here we are. All right, we're live on through Restream, and then it should pop over to LinkedIn. It is streaming to LinkedIn, apparently, at least the event. Hopefully everything's good there. Well, LinkedIn's it usually has a bit of a lag. Check, maybe it's just coming up through my page. All right, well, if you are watching this, thanks for hanging for a second. We're trying to get the LinkedIn Live going on here. I'm here with Dutch Schwartz.
Hey.
And now we need to figure out how to get you. Oh, there you go. All right. So this is gonna do the thing where it like flips back and forth between us. Can we just have like both of us
Oh,
like on
when
the
one
screen at the
person's
same
talking,
time?
does it prioritize us?
I guess so. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, let's see what we got. All right. Well, we are showing up as live. It's just not showing up in the event, which is weird. But hey, that's always fun. Manage. Yeah, I can't really start the event or do anything else on this. But if you are watching, welcome. Again,
Welcome,
Brian
welcome.
Hoagley and Dutch Schwartz. Let's take a look. I'm going to check another thing. Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right. I got the feed looking so we're both on. Everybody can see us. So
Okay,
that's
cool.
working
Awesome.
now. Great. I don't know. Like it looks like it's just coming straight off of my account, not the event. So LinkedIn, we need to talk about your instructions for how to set up LinkedIn Lives again, right? Oh man, technology, always fun. All right. Well, Dutch, why don't you introduce yourself while I finalize the rest of this setup?
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't met me before, I'm the Vice President of Cloud Services, and I also act as a VC, so an advisor for clients. So we focus on a lot of clients who, as they're scaling and growing, may not yet have a full-time need for a CISO to bring on board, but they do still have to do compliance, audit. They have maybe an assessment coming up, or maybe some kind of strategic move that they need to make. And so the value that SideChannel brings is that everybody on the team is a former executive. So in many cases, they've probably done this two or three times, right? So that's really what you're getting is all that experience. And hopefully we, can get you around the minefield of things that maybe even we've made mistakes on, in the past and try to make it easier and faster for you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and we're super excited to have you on the team. Obviously, joining us in the last bit from some larger company called AWS, and
Yeah,
uh, helping us really kind of focus in on where mid-market companies all the way to small enterprise can um, start getting the same type of access, right, to that type of
right.
experience. That was the whole premise of SideChannel. Well, we're not actually here to talk about SideChannel so much. That's for some other days. Really wanted to pick your brain
Sure.
and get your expertise going here. We are looking to do these LinkedIn Lives if we can make everything work correctly. Every other week, probably shooting for like the second and third Thursday of the month, or the first and third Thursdays, but you'll see it right around this time on a Thursday, probably about twice a month going forward. So, thanks for everybody for tuning in. I am Brian Hoagley. I'm the founder and the CEO of SideChannel, located here in the Boston area. In what I was going to hope was going to be a lot better weather than we are having, but it's good day to be inside and recording and kind of just getting out there. So, here we go. Dutch, we really wanted to focus and talk about cloud security, right? Insights, and
Hmm.
and that's the kind of your bag, your expertise. Definitely an area that we're seeing a lot of need for within our client base, and it's growing. And just how do we touch on a couple areas that seem to be really important to most organizations in that mid-size to small enterprise space. And I think that's kind of where we want to center, and we'll go from there. If
Sounds
you
good.
are following us on LinkedIn directly off my page, hello. I'm sorry, I don't know why LinkedIn did not want to do this underneath the event page that we created. So thank you for signing up, but somehow we're over here. Um, yeah. So with that, let's go with kind of some first questions.
Sure.
So we want to kind of explore, right, how organizations can ensure cloud security initiatives support business goals, right? It's like
Mhm.
a kind of a blanket statement for all of cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity should
Right.
support business goals, but focusing on cloud security initiatives like growth, resilience, and competitive advantage. Um, you know, this is a funny one. I've actually kind of gotten the inverse of this, but just from your lens, and
Sure.
again, talking with who you're talking with, what are some signs that security is acting as a business enabler versus a roadblock?
Sure. Yeah, so one of the best ways, and it's sort of a softer way, right? But one of the best ways to understand if you're really viewed as part of the team, right? Is do you get invited? And I don't mean that like flippantly, but when you get pulled into meetings that aren't, quote, specifically about security, end quote, that's when you know you've crossed the Rubicon, right? So when you get pulled in, they're like, oh, hey, we need to have Sanjay in this meeting. Hey, we need to have Susan in this meeting, right? When they realize that, oh, the CISO is really an executive like all the other executives, and they should be in there, even if there's not a specific topic or a point that's security related, right? And so that's sort of the maturity curve as well, right? For CISOs, as well as CISOs moving into the cloud if they've not spent a lot of time in the cloud, and that's ensuring that you really have a firm grasp of, well, what's the business strategy, right? How do I ensure that I'm tying into that, right? And Gartner, in their top 10 mistakes or top 10 pitfalls to avoid, they say something very similar, which is an executive mandate is not a strategy. And I think it's actually well put, right? And so there's a bit of confusion. Not everybody has a background in planning or from the military like you and I do. So strategy and tactics are not the same. Strategy and operations are not the same, right? And so
Right.
we sort of use these terms unintentionally, right? And the civilian sector are not realizing that they really mean different things, right? So strategy is that integrated set of choices that you make, right? It has to have a theory behind it because if there's no theory, then it's just operations, right? In other words, you're just doing things. So, building a new factory, opening a new office, creating a new product, even, that's not a strategy. It's operations, right? A strategy is we have a theory about how the community, the universe, the customer set that we operate in wants to or needs to do something, and we think we have a skill set that we can bring to bear to that, right? And it has to be trade-offs in that strategy. So you know that you're really being seen as a business enabler when you get that invite, and it's a business level meeting. It's not a, oh gosh, I haven't met with the CISO for the last month. I need to set up
Right.
that. We have a standing call. So that's one of the best ways to know if you're really being seen that way from the rest of the team.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen that. People people in the business proactively reaching out and looking to get your insight. They have a problem, right? And they're
Mhm.
like, "Hey, the problem I believe is security. I'm going to go talk to the person in charge of that area and be like, "Hey, what are your thoughts? I want to come to a resolution. I'm not coming in here to get push you to say yes. I'm not coming in here hopefully to just get a blanket no. I want to work with you. I want to see you as a
Mhm.
partner. I have this problem. I believe you are the solution. Help me help you. Like, let's work together and like you are the expert on this. How do we do this right? Versus people just doing the end run, right? Like trying to get around you because they
Sure.
know you're a blocker, right? That's the kind of
Yeah,
thing.
it's I laugh because it's so trite. It's such a trope, and it's a trope because it was for so long really true. I think you do see more improvements certainly on companies that are more digitally native or maybe were quote unquote born in the cloud, right? Or sort of
Right.
younger companies. There's a little bit more flexibility there. They see that. But back to your comment about how do you know you're really being seen as an enabler, I'd also stress even with a small team, and if you have three, four, five people that same thing should be happening at each level, right?
Hmm.
So are the employees, are the other managers, are the other directors coming to the technology team, right? Not just like, oh, I had this thing happen and it's real bad. Can you help me fix it? Right? But proactively, like, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. What should we be thinking about, right? So I want to
Right.
stress that too, that we should be pushing that at all levels, right? That everybody in technology should be seen as not somebody who's sort of, oh gosh, I need to call the help desk, or oh, I need to get them to approve a thing, but like, hey, I want to collaborate with them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you where do you see most organizations kind of falling short on that? When they just got
Yeah.
is it the personality? Is it like the person? Is it the
No, I
culture of
think
the organization around the person?
it's a combination of factors, right? So one
Yeah.
is security as a discipline, right? As a domain is one of the younger, right, disciplines, right? So we can definitely make the case today for if you had a chief data officer or risk. Because there's some other ones that are also really new. But relative to roles that people have always been familiar with, the CIO role, certainly the CFO role, right? They've been around much, much longer. So a lot of very, very capable CISOs today came up hands on keyboard. So there's a lot of greatness that comes out of that, right? Being able to
Right.
empathize with your employees and, oh gosh, yeah, I remember. And you can really do a lot of collaboration and coaching that way. But as it relates to the business team, you really need to lean into that business executive side. So I don't think it's a personality thing as much as it's probably an unintended, right? And if a CISO or whomever the senior person is who's responsible for security, if they focus on the tech part of it, that just reinforces, right? That, oh, well, I just push this button when I have a help desk problem, when I have an issue, right? And you want
Right.
to get beyond that and start talking about like, hey, where are we headed? So you want to be looking at what's the company strategy, right? What are we looking at doing over the next 18 months? Are we looking at do M&A activity? Are we going to be more CapEx or OpEx intensive, right? Where are we making bets, right? Because strategy has to have trade-offs. So where are we
Right.
making bets? And when you start asking those questions, it'll just sort of lead to a dialogue, right? But yeah, the other part in the culture piece is that sometimes what happens is even when you have a really capable security team, it's seen as like, oh, well, there's a security team over here of 7 people, so that's their job, right?
Mm.
And well, yeah, role-wise, that's their day-to-day job, but it works best when everyone understands that doing things safely, doing things securely, that's the way we do things here. And so my analogy sometimes to engineering folks is it's like quality, right? And so there was a period where we all went through TQM and all these quality initiatives, right? But there was a quality department, right? So what you're sort of unintentionally saying is, oh, well, but it's not my problem, right? You sent me through training for a week, but there's a
Yep.
quality team over here, right? They'll
Right.
fix it at the end of the process, right? Now we know that's a terrible idea, right? It has to be baked into the beginning of the process. So culturally, it's the same thing, right? And I know like there are some CISOs and security folks who are like, right, but it's my role. No, it is your role still. It's absolutely your germane, you know, responsibility to take care of that area, but everybody has to do things in a safe way because we have a preponderance of evidence, right? It's not going to be quote unquote the security team that necessarily makes a mistake, right?
Hmm.
It's going to be an employee trying to get their work done,
Right.
right? They're trying to move quickly, they're trying to be effective. AI, generative AI is a bit of the same, right? People are just trying to do things so they can be effective and they don't understand. So it's part of our responsibility to coach them, right? Hey, I know that you don't know that there's a risk in using this, but you're using the free version,
Yeah.
and we have a company version,
Corporate version,
fully
right?
vetted. Yeah, and it's just it's a normal thing. We've seen it over and over again, right? We saw it with Wi-Fi, we saw it with SaaS apps, we saw it with mobile apps, right? We saw it with people using their mobile devices that are personal devices. So we've seen waves of this now over the last 20 or 30 years. So that's I think one of the things that people miss is why are we going to use the cloud? It
Right.
sounds kind of silly to say it that way, but that's really the case, right? Because your mileage may vary, right? Why, you use the cloud as a 100 employee, digitally native company that's doing a software platform may be totally different than a company that has 2 or 3 lines of business and is in manufacturing or life
Oh yeah.
science, right?
Oh yeah.
And so people sometimes forget they're like, well, we're going to the cloud. If you remember, there's that one movie where somebody posts something unintentionally in the cloud, right? And they're driving in the car frantically, and the other character's like, what does the cloud even mean? And the
Yeah.
person goes, I don't know. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows what it
Nobody
means.
knows. And it's funny because it's like, because it's ubiquitous, right? It's sort of back there like electricity, right? Where, if you don't have to think about it, you don't really think about it, but you should, right? So what is our strategy for utilizing the cloud? So when
Yeah.
people feel less happy than they'd like a year or 2 years later, it's because they didn't do that piece. So you really got to go, what's the strategy, right? Why are
Right.
we going into the cloud, right? So you and I have talked about this in the past about outcomes. If I can pick an outcome, then I can start to shape how and why we're using the cloud,
Right.
right? So a lot of times when I initially talk with people, it's like, oh, we're driving revenue or we want to save money. Those are both great. Big fan. Those are
Yeah.
just called being a company who's not a charity or a non-profit organization, right? I mean, again, that's not a strategy to say we want more revenue or we want to lower costs.
Right.
That's operations. Like, yeah, of course, that should be part of the framing, right? But it's really about speed to market. Like you can move so much quicker, right, with cloud than you could historically with legacy, right? It's about
Right.
flexibility. It's about being able, oh, well, let's try this. Let's just turn it on. And then you test it and you can iterate really, oh, that didn't actually work the way we thought it was going to. Or client feedback was different than we
Right.
expected. So cool. So, right. So that's that flexibility to change, right? The
So I want to
innovation.
come back to that actually like
Yeah,
in a second because I want to
sure.
tackle some like issues that people are probably gonna like
Mm,
really run into first that are kind of like to you they're clear as day, me clear
yeah.
as day. But thinking about the well-intentioned director of IT at a mid-sized company, the
Hmm.
CIO that doesn't have a security team with them, maybe an organization that's relying predominantly on an MSP or an MSSP for, all those types of services,
Sure.
but has to still adopt some type of cloud. Maybe they got, some in-house capabilities, but they're adopting cloud
Hmm.
in some way. They're going to have to navigate some common cloud security pitfalls or pitfalls and all,
Yep.
right? So kind of like discussing like the widespread
Sure.
issues like misconfigurations, overly permissive access controls, outdated security practices that, we unfortunately picked up during our on-prem days, and now we're somehow replicating them in cloud native environments. What are the most common cloud security mistakes you're seeing
Sure.
today?
Yeah. So the most common mistakes are number one, not looking at your governance and looking
Mm,
at your policies. So
right,
that's it starts there, right? So because there are different capabilities in the cloud, it's not sort of like moving from vendor A to vendor B.
right,
Let's say we had a networking solution or an operating system even. You're sort of making a technical trade-off there, right? Of, oh, we think
yeah,
this one's going to do better. The cloud fundamentally operates differently. So the first thing is you really need to go back and look at your governance policies. And then out of that, you need to have some pretty clear roles and responsibilities, right? Who on the team, again, even if they're quote unquote not a security person, some of those roles need to be filled, right? At least as you're growing. And then from that, you really need to start with, well, what is my identity and access management? Because identity and access management fundamentally in all the CSPs, all the cloud service providers is different than it would have been historically for you. So that's a thing that sort of people move past really, really quickly. If you don't nail identity and access management at the beginning, it will come back later. It will
mm,
become a problem. And here's why, because the cloud, one of the utility pieces of the cloud is I can just turn things on,
right,
right? And so if I can just turn things on, then back to that comment about employees are going to start to turn things on in the best way possible, right? And so you really have to go, oh, wow, I need to really look at what's my identity and access management, and I probably need to change my policies, right? And
right,
I need to look at the permission and the access controls differently, right? Because it's really easy to people tend to be too permissive, right? Because they want people to test things, to use things. So let's say a development team as an example, but they don't have good roles and responsibilities. They don't have access control to limit that. So we trend towards giving too much access and instead of a zero trust strategy, a zero trust mentality, which would be I'm only going to give you the minimum amount of access that you need. And yeah, that
right,
sometimes occasionally will mean that a user will be like, ah, but I had to ask you last week, you know? I mean, so, but that's a better trade-off, especially if you can automate that request process, right?
yeah,
Than giving too much, right? You give too much, when your controls are really permissive, it can lead to a lot of issues, right? Not only kind of overtly security issues, but frankly, cost issues, right? So it's really easy to start in a cloud environment and all of a sudden 6 months in, you're like, oh, wow, this is actually more expensive than we projected because you have 200 employees and multiple people are turning things on, right?
right,
And so there's a whole industry around how do I cost optimize because of that,
right.
right? So you really have to look at those issues.
And it's funny because like what you're doing from a security perspective, or what you're doing in an IT infrastructure perspective, kind of like legacy on-prem models, right? Fail in modern cloud architectures. The same thing goes for security practices and models. Like you can't, things are different, right? Believe
Mhm.
it or not, I think in on-prem environments, it is a lot harder to just turn things on
It
and see
is.
them ubiquitously like now available across, an ecosystem or an environment. You know, Chalk one up for on-prem, like holy cow. I don't think people, see that. right? They're not thinking about those types of things. They're thinking about speed, right? And
Hmm.
so you're when you're thinking about speed, or you've got people in the organization that are motivated and focused on speed, you have to have somebody focused on the security aspects, right? To strike that right balance. So, how do you think the teams, whether they are, in that mid-market space, right? They're
Sure.
they're using outsourced services mostly, right? They
Right.
probably don't have a
Right.
big in-house team. How is that organization with predominantly outsourced services for security, maybe even for IT, minimal internal IT team? How are they supposed to strike that balance?
Yeah, you have to have somebody with enough seniority and enough experience who has the authority to go with that, right? And
Right.
so
They got to be the ones who are ready to be like, whoa, slow down.
yeah, well, and they have to be the ones who at least can explain the trade-off, right?
Right.
Like I'm mindful of sitting in a big conference room in Boston near the harbor with a large customer who is moving off colo, right? So co-location. So they had hosted data centers. And even though they were really large, it's really the same problem that we would have if you had 200 employees or 2,000 employees. And that was the CEO was pushing and the CRO to move quickly to develop some new services, right? So in this
Right.
case, software, microservices. And the networking team and the devs teams were all in, right? On okay, because it was not really a big change for them. And then the security team was struggling with how do I, to your point, how do I balance that? I don't want to be Dr. No and say no to everything, right? And no, you can't do that, right? So one of the ways to coach that through is well, look, let's go back to kind of risk management, right? Don't think about security, but risk management. It's okay that we accept the risk,
Yeah.
right?
It's one
But
of the
then we
four
just
ways to
have to
address
say,
risk, right?
right, exactly. But we have to explain what the risk is,
Right.
right? Argue effectively because we are trying to look after the company. But at some point, if the CRO, the CMO, and the CEO all want to move forward, then you say, okay, cool. So because of speed, because we want to move quickly to come out with this new service by July 1st, we're gonna have a trade-off there. We just need to document that we're gonna accept that risk.
Right.
That's one of the biggest things that I see happen with companies. Not that the company's less mature, but their security program is less mature. Is they
The
don't
thinking or
document
the
that.
the exposure to security, right? Like I've met plenty
Exactly.
of CFOs, CEOs, GCs who are like, they're not security experts, right? And I don't expect them to be, but they are cognizant of its importance into the entire business, right? Like I always push
Right.
people to like, they come out. So I've had some CEOs and folks just kind of come out of the gate and kind of not play dumb, but they'll do the, well, I'm not a security guy. I'm like, well, but you're a businessman or woman and you understand risk management. You understand risk versus
Yeah.
reward in business. Let's just frame it like that. You know, what are you trying to protect? Revenue coming in. Okay. Who's your biggest customer? Those guys over there? How much do you get out of them a year? $5 million? Okay. What supports you getting $5 million from them? And back
Mhm.
things up that way. And once you break it down into that and you don't come out of the gate with, everyone knows I'm a big NIST guy and I'm big on frameworks and standards. You don't
Yeah.
start with that. You
No.
start with your conversation and you back up to you lead the horse to water, right? You bring them into, hey, here's where I need to think about the things that I need to address so I can support the things that you're talking about. So,
Right.
Dutch, when you kind of get to that point, right, and you're evaluating and looking to improve, right, from, moving at speed, addressing things from legacy standpoints, and you're now kind of trying to dive into effective methods for assessing cloud environments against like some best practices. What do
Yeah.
you like? What when you're assessing a cloud environment, right?
Sure.
We've got plenty of standards out there. Majority
Tons
of
of them.
them are kind of blanket, work for just about
Right.
like organization as a whole, really good with on-prem because they've been built with on-prem. But what frameworks or standards do you typically
Sure.
look to reference when you're trying to focus in on that risk up there in the cloud?
Yeah. So the first part of the conversation, especially if it's, CFO, CEO, and again, to your point, they absolutely understand risk, right? And the board,
Right.
for sure understands your risk, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're a private board or public or an advisory board, they all are very steeped in risk management. But start with, if we're going to talk about frameworks, I like to make a little bit of a delineation just so we're all clear on it, right? So first, you have sort of compliance checklist things, and I don't mean that flippantly, but that's really what they are. So when I look at like PCI DSS, if you're handling credit card data, or you're looking at even HIPAA in healthcare or high trust, and
Yep.
you're looking at those are really intended to be, let me make sure I'm doing all these things, sort of like an airline pilot would before you take
Right.
off.
Yeah,
or
pre-flight checklist.
yeah,
Right.
it's a checklist, right? So let's put a pin in those. Sometimes you just have to do those, but the ones that are interesting in terms of driving culture and behavior are the more complex ones. So if you look at SP 853, you look at ISO 27001, you look at NIST CSF, I think they're all great. To your point, though, none of them have a lot of specificity around cloud, right? They speak to it, and there might be some questions that tie into a particular answer, but they're not really aimed at that. So there's
Right.
two that you can really lean on. So you can look at the CSA's Cloud Controls Matrix, the CCM. It's really robust. So there's a lot of questions that you can go through, and that can kind of guide you if you can guide yourself, right, without a lot of experience. And the other way to think about it is look at CIS, right? And CIS, as you know, started out as kind of the short set of hey, do these 8 things, then 12, and then became 20 and so forth. The good thing about the CIS is that the all three major cloud service providers utilize that.
Yeah.
So Microsoft Azure, GCP, and AWS all have a version that's tuned for them for CIS. So I like to start there because there's consistency. And even if you have one CSP today that's your primary, it's very likely that over the course of your cloud journey, you'll end up with another one, right?
Right.
And I say end up, but I mean there'll be a development team that's really likes, cloud service provider B for a set of reasons, or maybe you grow or you acquire another company. So a lot of times, even if you start with the primary, you'll end up with more than one. So by
Right.
using CIS, right, you can compare yourself consistently right across the board. So that's always my first recommendation is just try to use the CIS.
Yeah. I mean, I like those a lot. They're tactically appropriate for,
Hmm.
you can definitively say like, I'm doing this thing or not. How
Right,
much of my environment am I doing this thing? This,
right.
very tactical element. And I think that's missed. I can go days talking about, GRC and frameworks and like how, people kind of misuse them. Like my biggest pet peeve is when people tell me that there's a maturity model built into NIST CSF and they're referencing the implementation tiers, and NIST has even come out and had to say, these are not maturity tiers to be
Right,
used.
right.
It's a way to look at your risk management process as a whole for the organization. And then you have the controls. Um, some people like to layer CMMI on, but like when
Hmm.
you're starting to talk about maturity, I think people are jumping to it because they want to be able to show performance, they want to be able to show action. But
Sure.
what they're missing is what are you actually doing? Don't jump to the end slide where you're like, here's how we look and we're threes or fives or whatever. Like everyone wants to get to talk about that. And at the end of the day, the people reading those are looking at those like, well, what does that really mean? And what you should
Yeah.
be focusing on is like, really, what is being done in the infrastructure?
Right.
And I think that's a big battle that happens in larger organizations, and it's something that I actually believe smaller mid-market, small enterprise clients, organizations, clients of ours that I've just seen for 6 years now, right? I mean, this is who we've solely focused on. They don't get into that battle because they're sitting there going, I want to like address these things and move on because I got other stuff to
Hmm.
go do. I don't have the time to waste. I don't have the money to waste. Let's look at the tactical things. I could care less about maturity, right? Like I don't want to try to be a five. No one's asking why aren't we a five? People are just
Hmm.
asking like, are we doing what we need to be doing? Are we closer to being secure? Do we have some type of, incident response should something go bad? It's
Right.
basics, right? It's simple stuff. So I like the mid-market because they don't get lost in that, right?
Hmm.
And it's
It's
I
interesting
think
observation. Yeah.
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 So, if we're looking at kind of we're at about 25 minutes in. I
Sure.
figured, these are people are jumping in and jumping out. Thanks everybody for it. Drop a comment in if you want. We can actually get those. I have my phone linked up for that. As we're kind of like evolving security practices in the cloud, reflecting on kind of how cloud adoption requires a
Hmm.
mindset shift, right? And how security is planned, deployed, and then, measured, kind of like what we were just talking about. What do you think? How should security leaders kind of rethink their approach, themselves? This actually kind of goes back to what you started with,
Hmm.
but I wanted to kind of get through
Yeah.
some of these other
Right.
areas. But, what are security leaders who are helping, these mid-sized organizations or anybody who's looking to move to the cloud, or, even just again, well-intentioned, well-meaning, well-versed, IT directors,
Hmm.
CIOs, as they're
Right.
moving to the cloud, how they need to rethink that approach to what they're about to put up in the cloud and depend on the
Hmm.
cloud for.
Yeah. So there's a couple of pieces to answer that. So the primary one though is if we can talk about outcomes, then that gives you the flexibility, right? So in other words, it's sort of like when you're talking to the other leaders, what's the outcome that you want to try to drive towards, right? If you can talk to me about the outcome, there might be five ways to do that, right? Some
Yeah.
might be more expensive, some might be less, some might be more complex, some might be more risky, right? But if we can talk about what are the outcomes we're trying to deliver. So to go back to tie it all into the kind of the beginning of the discussion, one of the mistakes that's made frequently when people are first adopting cloud or moving into the cloud is that they try to do something that's too complex too quickly, candidly, right? And so really what you should try to do is pick something that's non-essential, honestly. Or
Sure.
hey, we were about to develop this new website workload, whatever it is, a smaller thing, go learn that. Back to your question about what can you do, right? If you're maybe you're a very competent security team and you're a great security architect, but you just haven't spent a lot of time in cloud. The mistake that people make out of a goal to move quickly is, wow, let's put our really critical ERP app
Let's
in the
start with
cloud.
that.
As this, yeah, and it happens over and over and over again. And again, it's well intentional. Like, oh, because a lot of times that's what drove that's the trigger. Let's go.
Right.
It sounds great, but that's not the right way. It's sort of that's like you're running before you crawled at all, right?
Yeah.
So start with something that's smaller, right? Or even if you have to, let's say that you are going to deploy something that's larger, but scale it down as much as you can, right? Like, hey, can we just roll this out to our clients in the US and not globally? Like, just scale it down so you get some reps in, right, on doing that. But back to the outcomes. So we want to talk about what are the outcomes we're trying to deliver, right? So it's not just increase revenue, improve market share, decrease costs. Cool, got it. Like that's just running a business, right?
Yeah.
So it has to be more specific. So the five that I use, and then not all five at the same time, just to be clear, but the five that I think most frequently land with customers is speed to market, and that's one we hear all the time, right? I want
Right.
to move quickly, I want to move quickly, right? The flexibility that I mentioned, right? The ability to iterate and sort of spin things up and spin things out very quickly. Innovation, right? When you show people and they get comfortable with how they can develop software or deploy websites or create a marketplace or whatever they're doing in the cloud, it'll just spark a lot of innovation. That's what we've seen like over and over and over again, right? And
Mm.
it's a lot of times from client interactions, right? Or maybe if you're in a situation where you have partners, maybe a partner interaction where they're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, and and if we roll the clock back 10 years, it just would have been like overwhelming to try to do that to your point. We're like, oh man, that's a 3-year project and I'd have to get approved,
Right.
with cloud, you can innovate things really quickly. Scale, right? You scale up and scale down. You and I talked about this before we jumped on, right? The ability to, your business will have cycles, right? And maybe you in a cyclical business period, right? Maybe if you're in more of a consumer or retail space, maybe the end of every quarter, and there's a end of year a spike, that helps you. But the biggest thing I would say to orient on in terms of outcomes is customer experience, right? How are we changing the customer experience because we're utilizing the cloud?
Mm.
So if you just do a one-for-one swap, like, hey, we used to do a thing this way, and we did all a great job. We mapped out all the workflows, and this is how we did it. And then you just transplant that into the cloud, then you miss the opportunity,
Right.
right? All you do is move where the resource lives. Maybe you cut some costs, maybe not. It's hard to say at first, but that's the miss, right? What you really should say is look at a customer journey and say, what can we do to make our customers happier? How do we delight our customers? Maybe it's offering new services. Maybe it's improving the ones we have. Maybe it's making it easier for them to select new services. But the customer experience, if you put that front and center, that's an outcome we can all talk about. So to give
Mm.
you an example of really great technologists, but sort of missing the mark, right? Initially in their conversations, I worked with a retail company and they were concerned about distributed denial of service, right? So they were concerned about people coming in and interrupting because they were a consumer-facing business, right? And so they
Okay.
had all
Yeah.
these projects around that, right? And it's cool. And I mean, you can go to the whiteboard and nerd out and map out all these different things, and you have to, everybody in the room. But at some point, when I sat down with the executive team, I'm like, hey, but what's the outcome we're trying to do here? Because if we're going to go to the CFO and ask for additional money, which sounds like we're probably about to do, then what are we trying to do?
Hmm.
And where we ended up was going back to kind of our first principles at that company. And then one of them was, yeah, unbelievable customer service. They wanted the customer experience to be really, really great. I'm like,
Right.
okay, that's the thing. That's the outcome that we can orient on, because then we can go talk to the CRO, the CFO, whomever, and say, hey, I don't want to bore you with all the technical details, but to make sure that they have a great experience on our website, there's some technology and some workflow and stuff I need to do behind the scenes, right?
Right.
To make sure that that happens. But start with the primary outcome. I'm trying to improve our customer experience. I'm trying to help out, if you start with that, and then by the way, jump in and say, hey, how are we doing net promoter score? Do we do net promoter score? How are we doing CSAT? How do we check on that, right? So again, involve yourself in the mix so that you become an enabler. So they're like, oh, we're not actually tracking that. Hey, well, my team can help track that,
Yeah.
right? And that's a way to get in easy that I've done before. I was like, hey, are we doing net promoter score? And they're like, no. I'm like, it's a really easy way to do it, right? Especially we do it over time, and you'll get some good signal about are we moving the right way? And it's not how we think, but how they think, right? How the customer thinks. So
Yeah.
those are the kind of the big five I call them. Maybe
Solid.
it could be, they might use different words,
Sure.
around exactly that. But if I'm talking with them, say, hey, well, what's the board talk about? What's the CEO talk about? Right?
Right.
What's your CRO talking about? Let's tie it into those things, because then it's not popping up and saying, oh, we need this new tech. I mean, maybe you do, but that's not the outcome. The outcome is I want a better customer experience.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Now, this my next question, my last one really is, just
Yeah.
kind of advice around, somebody starting on their cloud transformation journey, maybe they want to accelerate, what they want to secure what they have. Now, you
Hmm.
recently just put together a great checklist that we're making available
Yeah.
off the SideChannel website. If you go to sidechannel.com, off of the under services, you'll find cloud security services. Really centers around everything that Dutch is talking about. But on that site right there, you can download a free, it's like 9-page checklist,
Yeah.
multi-phase checklist that Dutch put together. Really solid insights on like how to secure your cloud infrastructure, how to kind of accelerate your cloud adoption securely. Highly recommend going and checking that out off the website. We'll definitely kind of make it more available as time goes on, but you know, not kind of rehashing what's in there. We'll let people go read that. But, just generally, somebody's looking to kind of step into this. Maybe they've adopted a cloud infrastructure. They're the new CIO and they're picking up from whatever the last guy or girl, kind of half
Sure.
did. What's your advice, your 5-minute advice sitting down for, that free coffee that they buy you,
Yeah.
as they're looking to
Sure.
kind of start that kind of, that journey.
You touched on it, so I'm just going to pull that thread right back and let's say it's do the basics.
Yeah.
So when you go into any of the cloud service providers domain, right? You go into that world, there's a ton of options. I mean, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of services that you can do, and it's awesome, right? So from a choice standpoint, it's amazing. But it's a little bit like, walking down an aisle of a supermarket, right? And if you're somebody new to the company and we're doing a company picnic, I'm like, hey, oh, wait, and also grab some ketchup and grab some mustard and some barbecue sauce. You're gonna be able to do that pretty easily. Even if you just moved here from South
Right.
America and you don't even know kind of how we do things. You're like, oh, well, guess why? Because there's only really two or three choices, right?
Right.
Most people
It's
can't even
catch
name a
up or
fourth.
catch up, right?
Yeah,
Like
there's
you can't
yeah,
mess up.
you can't even like you couldn't even make another choice, right? Because there isn't
Right.
one for you, right? But if I told you, oh, also grab three different kinds of chips, you might stand in the aisle and be like, oh my God, I have no idea
Right.
what, or put yourself in another country, like, wow, I'm in Germany. I have no idea what kind of chips they like. It's too many choices, right?
Yep.
And so then it feels overwhelming. And then no matter which choice you make, you're slightly concerned, maybe that was the wrong choice. So that's my analogy for when you go into a cloud, it's really easy to be like, holy cow, there's 200 and some services. I don't even know where to start. And then I don't even know how to secure those, right, as well.
Right.
Start really small. Start with the basics. All the checklist stuff from every CSP is really about doing the basics. So do the basics really well. Look at your governance, look at your identity and access management, assign some roles. I don't care if they are officially a security person or not, because most of the things aren't really security specific. It's about business, right? Somebody who
Right.
understands the risk, right? So that helps you out as you're growing. And then scale it to an appropriate size, choose something that that you can handle and deploy it with the basic best configuration. Just go with what the vendor is really recommending for that environment. Just go with the basics for now, right? Because
Right.
that's kind of the tangential thing that people are like, well, do I need these other third parties? Maybe, but starting with them out of the gate is probably unnecessary. Like go with the platform, utilize it. If you're making a choice to go with that environment, maximize that,
Right.
right? Is
You,
there a really cool point product that probably, almost definitely, right? But if you don't have several years of experience doing actually the basics yet, then you probably don't need that, right? You
yeah, you
probably
made
really
that
need to
choice
do
for
the
a reason,
basics.
right? Like,
Yeah, maximize that choice. Get
right,
the most out of it that you can because there's less cognitive load too for the team, right? Okay, hey, I'm learning this Azure environment, or I'm learning GCP, right? Then I don't have to learn five other tools,
right.
at the same time, right? And they all give great training. There's a lot of free stuff you can do. So I always say, start with the basics. We used to call it eat your veggies, right? You got to
Right.
eat your veggies.
I actually want to go over to the slide
Oh yeah,
here.
cool.
Yeah, so this is actually the checklist that you put together, just kind of like a quick highlight. Shout out to Stephen Galinsky. Dutch's advice is pure gold off of
Ah, thanks, Steve.
LinkedIn. Thank you, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, if you can see here, what Dutch has put together, really great, and I'll kind of just show you stages 1 through 7 on what can be done on addressing your cloud security, multi-adoption. Really checklist style type of an approach. I think it's a phenomenal asset to pick up and use. Again, free. Just it's a great insight from Dutch. Every stage is built out the same way, right? He's got his goals, he defines some success metrics, and this is where your checklist goes, and then some just good general comments on how to think about enacting each of these areas. And Dutch goes through and builds out on each of these using alignment to standards, all the references linked and available within each stage, and you'll see each section as you go through. And then, in the end, some security design principles that I think are really important. But, back to Dutch's point, this start small, start simple. There's nothing wrong with that. Yes, you bought off on a new cloud infrastructure, and you're really excited. I've seen it, right? That you want to show the value. You want to move quickly into the cloud to be able to show that you made the right choice, get that product in there. The reason you see those big ERPs or those other big solutions going in first is because that's the whole case for moving was built around that product,
Right,
and now you've got to
right,
justify it. So if I can get it in there sooner, it'll be better. But I don't think that I agree with you. Build the muscle memory. This is new to you. This is new to your organization. Build the
right.
muscle memory of something small where you can actually afford to make mistakes. Can you afford to make mistakes with your ERP in the cloud and adopt it in that space first? You haven't learned anything. You're jumping right to the big leagues, right? Like
Right,
let's
right.
come on. We
And
can't
even
do
if you have to
that.
do that, try to do it in parallel then, right? So if you
Right.
have to do the move to email, ERP, customer support, whatever that is, but if you could even still just break off a small project,
Right.
even if it's not even a go live project, even if it's one that you come up with the team, and go, hey, look, let's just try a quick one, right? And just put something up. Maybe it's not even really customer facing, right, to your end customers, but go through that process if you can. And as a final thought, if I wrap this all up, it's utilizing the cloud is not a technical decision. Utilizing the cloud is a business strategy, right? So be thoughtful about where and when there's, as much as I've spent years and years and years in the cloud, doesn't mean it's always the right choice for everything
Right.
at this time, right? So be thoughtful about, hey, why this workload? Why this website? Why this application? Why this microservice? Why should we do that one in the cloud, right? And talk about because then you're going to drive towards an outcome for the business. If you don't do that, what will happen is you and maybe your hands forced, you push that ERP system up and you get it up there and it's kind of clunky, but you finally get it stabilized. But later, it will cause you more time and more cost to go back
Right.
a year, 2 years later and go, okay, we kind of missed some steps. Like we never actually updated our governance. Oh, yikes. Now we've grown, we've added people and well, we put our permissions are way too permissive, right? We didn't really think about if we wanted to do zero trust or not. Do we want to start that journey?
Right.
And so you miss some of those steps. So go with the basics, understand how it's aligned and drive towards an outcome because then it's easy to chart. Are we hitting the mark here? Maybe delighting our customers look different than we thought it would, but but we still got metrics to say, hey, they're happier than they were 6 months ago. So those would be kind of my wrap it up with the bow parting comments. It's not a technical choice. It's a business strategy. And yep, there's technical things we got to do and tick, tick, tick. We should check those off and keep that moving. But you got to always drive up towards, well, what's the strategy? What are we doing different? What are we doing differently or faster or better today or in the future than we could have done without it? That's the way to think
Yep.
about it.
I love it, Dutch, man. Always, always a good time to talk about this with you. Really appreciate you joining. I'm Brian Hogley. I'm joined by Dutch Schwartz. We will be doing a number of these over the next couple Thursdays, maybe every other Thursday. I mean, that's just the way I have to do it. But yeah, we will get LinkedIn Live sorted out. Glad for everybody who was able to join today via my channel on my page. We'll start getting these out. You can also catch us on YouTube on the CISO Life or the Side Channel YouTube channel if you prefer that. I think we actually come through on 1080p over there. I don't know if the world needs to see that exactly, but hey, whatever. But again, Brian Hogley and Dutch Schwartz, thank everybody for being out here on a Thursday. Drop your comments, share this if you can. Reach out if you have any questions. You can find us at sidechannel.com or really anywhere else online. Feel free to reach out. We're always here. So with that, take care. Thanks, everybody.